And good evening, everybody. Buonasera a tutti. Good evening, y'all. It is January 18th, just past 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time. And welcome back to episode 53 of What's the Scoop? Hope everybody had a wonderful week. Hope everybody has enjoyed whatever it's been that you've been following in sports recently, whether it's been the NFL playoffs, whether it's been the college football playoffs, whether you're like me and just getting fired up for Major League Baseball spring training to start, whether it's following the NBA and NHL, sort of the midpoint of those seasons, whatever it is, it's got your attention in sports right now. I hope you've been enjoying it and hope everything's been going well for you. I think there's really no shortage of news and updates and relevant subject matter at any point in any sport, but man, do we have particular load of coverage or matter to cover today. We've got everything from, pick your sport. We've got in NFL, we've got the NFL playoffs going on this weekend. College football, that championship's Monday night. NBA, Jimmy Butler, another day, another Jimmy Butler headline. Then of course Major League Baseball. We're less than a month from spring training, from pitchers and catchers reporting, and then that guy signed with the Dodgers. Surprise, surprise. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit. But also we've got the Hall of Fame announcements coming up on Tuesday to see who this year is going to be the latest inductees to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Had a wonderful chance to go back to the Hall of Fame personally with my mom for the second time a couple of weeks ago. It was my second time to the Hall of Fame in my life. First time was back in 2012. If you haven't been to Cooperstown, if you're any sort of a baseball fan, highly recommend it. Absolutely incredible experience. So, excuse me. Obviously, we're going to be covering all that. We're going to be covering some of the recent coaching matters off the field in the NFL. So, if at any point you want to jump in, have anything to say, have anything to ask, any just thing you want to comment that I haven't covered, please just jump right in. Looking forward to getting involved with talking to y'all tonight. That being said, there have been already a couple games. I'm going to start with the NFL. There have already been a couple games going on today within the NFL round of the playoffs as the postseason kind of rages on, and we start to get a little bit of a clearer sense of who's going to be in the running for those final spots in the Super Bowl next month. So today we've got the game that already went final, which was Texans at Chiefs. That, for those who haven't seen, the final score was 23-14 in favor of Kansas City. And currently in the second quarter of this game, we've got a 10-7 lead for the road Commanders over the Detroit Lions. I'll get into the Lions Commanders in a second, but when it comes to the NFL and just sports in general, obviously I know a lot of fans, myself very much included, we are very quick to point fingers at a call that we think shouldn't have gone against our team or should have gone in favor of our team. Obviously, I've spent many an hour speaking about one specific call that happened in 2023. If y'all remember that Super Bowl, y'all know which call I'm talking about. But this has to be one of the more aggravating games that I've watched, just as a complete third party with no rooting interest whatsoever. If you want to know why so many people hate the Chiefs, aside from the fact that they're just a very good team and very talented team and well-coached team, you can watch today and see a great example as to why. There was, for those who didn't see, first of all, there was a ticky-tack call against the Texans in favor of Pat Mahomes. I think it was a roughing the passer or unnecessary roughness. I got to double check on the verbiage of it, but there was that call that went again. And again, he was already sliding. The announcer, there were two announcers, one of whom was Troy Aikman, and even he didn't agree with the call. Basically, Mahomes went up and he was taking the ball down. He was sliding. He had become a runner. He was no longer as considered a passer. He was considered a runner. And he got hit because at a certain time, because again, when else was he going to get hit based on the way that the defensive play was unfolding? And it was called for a 15-yard penalty, and obviously that was an automatic first down. So basically, so that automatically gave Kansas City, additional momentum, surprisingly. And then And that was far from the only one. There was a couple of other different plays that or calls that were made, and um, it was just when you have people like Troy Aikman who are even talking about how they can't believe the way that the calls are going, the generally non-team broadcasters or announcers, whatever you want to say, typically really try not to be too vocal, at least from what I've seen about refs one way or another, or at least they try and give refs the benefit of the doubt. Not even the league rules analyst who was covering this particular game could defend some of the calls that were being made. And as much as may think that some of the, and as I sometimes do, think that some of the talk about scripted is just, about the league being scripted is just sour grapes, or it's one thing or another. There is some real concern to be had when you have situations like this, when you've got Mahomes basically going up and basically just doing an NFL version of flop, and it completely not even selling it all that well. He needs to take some acting classes, but at the same time, pulled it off, I guess, enough for it to work in his and his team's favor. And I'm in no way saying that if it weren't for those calls, the Texans would have definitely won the game. I'm in no way saying that, but it certainly didn't help. And I will be very surprised if this doesn't become more widespread conversation in the coming days across sports media or across NFL media, because it's one thing for fans to get, say like, oh, the refs, gave this one to the Chiefs or one thing or another. It's a different animal when I start hearing it from national broadcasters, national media, and people who were covering the game. Like that, once it gets to that point, then that's another level of concern. And I hope that the league doesn't turn a blind eye to that. Got a few comments coming in. Mr. Osborne says, good evening, Swifty Scoops. Hope you're doing good. I'm doing well, Mr. Osborne. Hope the same for you. And says he's awaiting surgery on Tuesday. So, Mr. Osborne, you'll be in my prayers, and I hope that everything goes smoothly on Tuesday for you. And I hope your hand recovers fully and swiftly, pun entirely intended. Mr. Burns says, watching from Cedar Hill, Texas. Good to see you, Mr. Burns. Appreciate you always making it on to the shows as often as you can. Says, so glad the Vikings lost. Now the Lions got to go. I am rooting for the Lions tonight. It'll be a cold day in hell before I root for the Commanders. So unfortunately, we are on opposite sides in that game. But I will say that I am also glad that the Vikings lost. I personally don't have anything against the Vikings, but there were so many people who were just in this whole, like, I shouldn't say that. I'm not glad the Vikings lost, but I'm glad to see that the narrative of, Sam Darnold is now suddenly, what he was supposed to be when he was picked third overall in 2018. I'm glad to see that that's quieted down a little bit, because I'm not going to say he's the reason why they lost that game, but, I think that a lot of credit this year goes to Kevin O'Connell. I think that a lot of credit this year for their success goes to, and some of it does go to Darnold. I'm not going to take anything away from him, but I think people have started to anoint him as having gone from, a bust to a top 5 or top 10 quarterback in the NFL. So I'm glad to see that the momentum, if you want to call it, or however you want to phrase it, has begun to slow on that a little bit, because I think that was getting a little bit out of control by people who have wanted so badly to say anything positive about Sam Darnold. The ref sure with the Chiefs again. Sheesh, poor play calling. Yep, I was just talking about that, Mr. Osborne. Again, it's one thing as a fan when you're talking about, the team or this game was in the bag with the refs, because my team lost or one thing or another, and sometimes those are legitimate gripes. But I know this has been a long-standing thing for fans to say about the Chiefs, and I know some people say, oh, they just hate the team because they're so good, and I'm sure that is some of the case some of the time for some people. But tonight, I mean, again, you had people like Troy Aikman, you had the rules analyst, you had so many people who have no rooting interest in either side of the game, who were blown away by the way that the Mahomes flop was called, or rather how it wasn't handled, and then just time and time again, they've got the one guy, the Hawaiian player whose name I'm forgetting right now, but just absolutely wild to me how that transpired, and I hope to see there be some sort of recourse in the coming days and weeks. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I hope to see at least somebody come out and take responsibility for it. For the fact that several of those calls today did not. Not that, I'm not saying that they didn't help the Texans, because obviously it's not the ref's job to help either team, but the Texans definitely had already enough of their work cut out for them going up against the Chiefs in Kansas City, and this definitely was just an added challenge. The Rams just chewed them up. The Vikings were similar to the Broncos. Can't beat the good teams. Yeah, I think that the Vikings obviously were thrust into a situation they didn't expect to be in. Obviously, they expected J.J. McCarthy to be their quarterback, and then that obviously didn't come to pass. I know that they picked up Jones at one point, etc. I know that Darnold definitely overperformed expectations this year, certainly including mine. But again, when you have a limited quarterback, now when I say that, I'm saying that in two different situations. When it comes to the Vikings versus the Broncos, I say limited quarterback just because he hasn't had the opportunity to get to a ceiling yet. Again, this is his first year. And then the Vikings limited just because, again, I think that there's just limitations to Darnold as a quarterback. And I think that what Kevin O'Connell was able to get out of him this year offensively, I think was just remarkably commendable and respectable. But no, just not a particularly great look for the NFL and for the crews there. Especially in the wake of how things have fallen out with the commentary since the game. That being said, just an update real quick. I mentioned that it was a 10-7 lead for the Commanders in the second quarter. The Lions did just score a touchdown and get the PAT. They have now taken a 14-10 lead taking a 14-10 lead with about 7 minutes to go in the second quarter. That scoring play was, a touchdown to Laporta. It was a 2-yard pass to Laporta from Jared Goff. So now, just so y'all have the update on that one. Coming off of that, like I said, I'll get into some of the other games that are going to happen tomorrow in a little bit, but I am going to jump in for what I think is probably the most notable football news that's happened this past week, which was I don't even know if you would call it dismissal or parting of ways or how you want to phrase it, but the decision by the Dallas Cowboys and Mike McCarthy not to return to, or not to have a working relationship going forward. It was very odd because he definitely was not. I definitely would not consider him fired, because it sounds like they were very surprised that he didn't stay. So, by that nature, I wouldn't consider him fired. It sounds to me like basically when his contract expired, he basically went to the front office and said, "This is what I want," and basically, I guess they were surprised by what he asked for. So, I guess it hit an impasse at that point. But I am looking forward to seeing if McCarthy gets another job this year. I certainly think he'd be a solid offensive coordinator, if not a head coach. And I'm even more intrigued to see where Dallas goes with this thing, because for those who didn't see, ESPN's Diana Rossini was one of several people to put it out on, I want to say it was Thursday, basically saying that the Cowboys had no inkling really, or no strong intuition that McCarthy would actually leave, and they pretty much were left scrambling trying to put together an interview list, because they were going through now a coaching search that apparently they never intended or never expected that they would have to do. That has left them so far with 3 candidates who either have interviewed or are going to interview. The ones who have interviewed are Robert Saleh, former Jets head coach, even though he's expected to return to the 49ers as defensive coordinator. And the other interview so far, being with Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, obviously was the offensive coordinator for Dallas for a period of time. And upcoming, they're going to interview Leslie Frazier, former defensive coordinator for multiple different teams. I believe the Bills was one of them. I know he head coached the the Minnesota Vikings a while time ago. But it's really surprising to me, I guess, that they haven't sought to interview more people than they have so far. Um, I know that they were a little bit behind the eight ball with a couple of things, but when you've got teams like Chicago and New York who have over a dozen interviews either done or in progress or imminent, and you're sitting here and you've got three, maybe four, if you eventually get one on the books with Deion Sanders, which I'm still skeptical of, because and just to add on to this, because this has not been something that's gotten a a ton of exposure when talking about Deion, but he also, similarly to what a coach would have to do if they were getting interviewed from another team in the NFL, they have to get consent from Colorado to interview him for a head coaching position. And that request has not been granted. And to my knowledge, it hasn't even been requested yet. So while there is apparently mutual interest between Dallas and Deion, it's to this point seems relatively cursory due diligence, whatever you want to say. So I wouldn't consider that quite as far down the line as I think some people were making it sound. And from my vantage point right now, I would consider Kellen Moore to probably be the most likely of the four candidates that I mentioned, just based on just based on the fact that, again, I think Saleh is not gonna. I think he's gonna go back to San Francisco, and I think that when you look at between Frazier and Moore, again, just knowing how Kellen Moore is, knowing how Jerry Jones is, I think Jerry Jones will look at him as somebody who will listen to him, for lack of a better way of putting it. I don't think that Kellen Moore is going to get a ton of opportunities elsewhere. To my knowledge, he hasn't been considered a major candidate elsewhere just yet. I know he's getting other interviews. I believe he's having one tonight or tomorrow with the Jacksonville Jaguars, or at least sometime soon with the Jaguars. But I would expect that Kellen Moore is going to end up ultimately being the next head coach of Dallas. And then if it weren't him, I think that my sort of dark horse who hasn't even gotten an interview request yet, I still say Jason Witten. Of anybody who hasn't been interviewed yet, he probably would be the guy that I would say keep your eye on would be Jason Witten. Mr. Osborne says, I would love to see how. Whoops. There we go. I would love to see how J.J. McCarthy can do next season and good. He comes back to full health. I would absolutely love to see that too. I thought that he and O'Connell in Minnesota, I thought that was a great match, a great fit, similar to what I felt about Denver and Bo Nix. But obviously we didn't get to see some of that materialize this year. So I also would love to see them come back next year and hopefully have a good season with him. Mr. Osborne says the Commanders just scored. It's now 17-14 in favor of Washington. Okay, thank you for that update. So correct myself earlier, 17-14 now apparently with the Commanders once again ahead. Coming off of that now, I'm going to switch a little bit. I'm going to switch over to baseball because I think that while definitely some significant news both on and off the field with regard to the NFL, I think probably the biggest news that's happened in the last day or so that I really wanted to cover is the Roki Sasaki signing. For those who missed it, the sort of consensus number one free agent from the international amateur market, who was eligible to sign as of January 15th. That's when all international amateur free agents were eligible to sign. He'd been talking to about 20 teams, but then the reports were that it had been narrowed down to the Dodgers, Padres, and Blue Jays. Reports emerged earlier in the week that the Padres had been told that he would not be going to San Diego, and at which point it was either going to be LA or Toronto, and we found out last night it is, in fact, LA, and he is going to be joining a just embarrassment of talent in LA, not just in their rare rotation with guys like Yamamoto, and Otani and some of the other guys they have, their a rotation that's deep enough now where people like Tyler Glass now are being looked at as potential 6 starters, which is just ridiculous. Uh, so all of that transpiring, and excuse me, uh, the final deal, the final amount in terms of what Sasaki was going to sign for and what his bonus was going to be was never going to be particularly high. They were at the liberty of the restraints that are imposed if you sign a young player, international free agent. So teams have requisite and not fixed pools, but limited pools from which they can spend that money every year. He's going to be getting a $6.5 million signing bonus, which actually, and this is one thing I want to jump in on because I've heard a lot of people the last day or so basically say, "Oh, the Dodgers can just get anybody they want. The Dodgers can pay for anybody, et cetera, et cetera." The Dodgers weren't the team that could afford him, that had the most money to offer him out of their international pool, out of the 3 teams that were left between Toronto, LA, and San Diego. This was $6.5 million. This is nothing compared to what he could eventually get, and nothing compared to what he would have gotten had he waited a couple of years. And there actually is a very interesting story. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but if you go and look at his family and what he dealt with when his family tragically had suffered several losses during the tsunami that hit Japan several years back, and just sort of how he had this mentality inflicted upon him of tomorrow isn't promised. So that was discussed as some of his big motivator for him in terms of why he jumped now as opposed to 2 years from now. I do encourage y'all to go look at his story and go research him as a person, not just as a baseball player, because he does seem like a very good guy. He does seem like a guy who's got a very a story that where he's just seems like he's going to be an easy guy to root for, and I think a lot of people, myself included, were shocked about the Dodgers thing, only in the sense that we kept hearing that he doesn't want to go somewhere where he's going to be where there's going to be a big media frenzy or one thing or another. And that kind of, when I first heard that he signed with the Dodgers, it kind of hit me as that seems counterintuitive to what we had heard. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I get the way that I can sort of put my mind around it is if you're looking at it as he's not the star, he's not the big man on campus because he's now one of several. I mean, you've got, like I said, Otani, you've got Yamamoto, you've got presumably Kershaw's going back, you've got Betts, you've got Freeman. I mean, you're looking at a guy who might not even be the 8th or 9th biggest name on his own team, where he could have been the number 1 biggest name on several teams. So in that circumstance, perhaps that is sort of the angle from which they were coming at it, in which case I could see how that makes sense. But be that as it may, however you look at it, there's been a lot of consternation among fans over the last day or so, saying that the Dodgers, or saying that he dragged this out and it was always going to be the Dodgers, going so far as to even say that he had a handshake deal in place with the Dodgers, weeks ago, and that all this was just for show purposes. Someone, I think it was Jim Bowden, basically said that there should be an investigation from the league in terms of whether or not there were some shady dealings where something was basically nudge or wink agreed upon several weeks ago before teams were allowed to negotiate. I don't think it's impossible that was the case. I think that the ability to actually pinpoint that, prove it beyond all reasonable doubt, and then get any sort of recourse for that, I think is very close to nil. I'm going to find it very challenging for them to prove that there was basically a nudging, sort of a hush hush deal kept under wraps for that long, and excuse me, and if so, how they're going to be able to prove that was the case, and also, even if they did prove that was the case, what would they do? Would they declare Sasaki a free agent and ban him from going back to LA? I don't know how they would handle that. But I think that people are looking at this now and they're saying, "Oh, the Dodgers are terrible for baseball. The Dodgers are terrible for baseball." Now, I will say this: I do think now that what was talked about during the MLB lockdown lockout rather, back in I think it was 2021. I want to say 2020, 2021, somewhere around there. Back during that lockout, I know that a big topic of discussion that I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of overlooked at the time because of other issues like who was going to be sacrificing more financially with regard to COVID, or the universal DH rule, or the length of the season, one thing or another. Because of all that, I think it kind of got overlooked. But I do think that the concept now of an international draft is definitely going to get some sort of rejuvenated buzz and rejuvenated discussion going into the next collective bargaining agreement, which I believe would be instituted in, I want to say 2027. I'll have to double check on that. But just they'd have to come to some sort of agreement on that. But I do think that's going to be a renewed point of emphasis now, just in the sense of not only is one team sort of almost cornering the market coming out of some of the not just Nippon, but the KBO and some of the other leagues, but also just in the sense of how it's perceived that LA is able to sort of almost circumvent certain things financially. I don't quite see it all that way. The Dodgers were far from the first team to defer as much, or to make deferred contracts. The Nationals did it with Max Scherzer. The Mets infamously did it with guys like Bobby Bonilla as many as 20 some odd years ago. Obviously, the extent to which the financials were deferred by Ohtani were unprecedented, but it hadn't been done before. So, and that was his choice. There's a lot of players who wouldn't agree to do that, or who haven't considered doing that, or maybe who have been asked to do that and have declined or whatever. But it only recently became a thing because Ohtani's deal had a historic level of deferment. So that, having that as the facts of the situation, I struggle to see how it's suddenly bad for baseball because I know people want to say that there should be a salary cap and a salary floor, which the only way I'm agreeing on a salary cap is if there's also a salary floor, because I still maintain that what's worse for baseball is not the teams actually paying to improve their club. It's the teams who are saying that they can't afford any of these guys, when, again, this guy got a deal of $6.5 million international bonus, and the Dodgers were not the team that could afford to pay him the most, that had the biggest pool from which to offer him. Again, some of these guys are just choosing to go to the Dodgers for different reasons. They've got a strong reputation with regards to developing guys. They've got a strong reputation with regard to sort of taking guys who have struggled and helping them figure that out, and working around that, and sort of getting another level out of guys. There's a strong reputation in the front office going all the way up through Andrew Friedman. So it's not just who can offer the most money. Sure, that's a part of it, but again, there's going to be teams or players who decide to go to the Dodgers whether or not they offer them the most money. And I don't think you're going to suddenly solve everything just by instituting a salary cap and a salary floor. I don't think that's suddenly going to, but I also don't think it's like, you look at the process as to how we got here, and you sort of go step by step in terms of the links in the chain, not just with Sasaki, but going back, Mookie Betts, they got perhaps one of the biggest lopsided trades in recent memory, got one of the top 3 or 4 players in baseball. That was a trade that both them and the Red Sox agreed to. The Red Sox agreed to that trade. They agreed to, and so that was a fully fair, I shouldn't say fully fair, but mutual risk that was taken, and fully agreed upon. Then you have Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman was a bit of a uncomfortable case, I'll put it that way. For those who don't know the backstory on that, Freeman basically, he had become a free agent. He was set to go back to Atlanta. A lot of people believed that was almost a foregone conclusion. And then his agents at the time basically more or less sort of withheld information about what Atlanta was willing to do because they wanted to nudge him over to Los Angeles. At which point, after he realized the way that things had been handled somewhat nefariously and somewhat shadily, if that's even a word, he made representation changes, but the contract was already finalized at that point with Los Angeles. So that was, I don't really blame Los Angeles for that. That definitely is much more on the part of his agents, or ex-agents now, I guess you'd say. And then, they go and do the Ohtani thing, which if Ohtani wants to, punt on that much money down the road to give his team a better chance to win now, that was his prerogative. Two sides have to agree to a deal. They didn't force him into doing anything. And Ohtani is very clearly a guy who cares more about winning than money. And then, Yamamoto apparently, he obviously got one of the biggest contracts in baseball history, definitely one of the biggest ones for a pitcher. And it sounded pretty clear that the ability to play with Ohtani was something that he had put some weight in, I guess is the best way to phrase it. So, yeah, it's going to be frustrating, I'm sure, to watch what looks like an easy, heavy favorite now on paper, becoming the next 3 or 4 years, becoming pretty much the team to beat and the team that looks like it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of take out, I guess, a beast to slay, or however you want to put it. But do I think it's terrible for baseball? Do I think it ruins the game? No. I think that it's a select, again, there were so many decisions by so many different people that got the Dodgers and baseball themselves here to this point. I struggle with, if you want to call them like this decade's like quote unquote evil empire, then yeah, sure, that's a fair assessment. But to say it's like some sort of fundamental fatal flaw of baseball or for baseball, I think that's somewhat overselling it. Again, these games still have to be played. You still have 26 players on a roster. You still have to play 162 games, and then you still have to play another 20 some odd games potentially in October. And so a lot of things can happen. Injuries happen, unexpected regressions or progressions happen. They definitely look like the team to be in the National League right now, but I'm not somebody who buys into the whole this is terrible for the league, this is terrible for the game or anything like that. I think that some front offices are just being lapped by the way that the Dodgers do business and by the way that the Dodgers make things happen. And a big surprise when they see a successful organization knowing how to not just sign players, but how to develop players, how to help them improve their games, how to make them better, and with a positive culture. Big surprise, that's going to attract more people to want to go there. Like I don't think that this is entirely that complicated. Mr. Osborne says, pick 6 Washington, now 24-14 Washington. Oh, God. And then he says, this game is crazy. That came in a few minutes later, so I'm not quite sure what the context is behind that. Let me see if I can get a quick scoring update on that. Lions, Commanders. It is currently, okay. It's currently just past the 2-minute warning in the second quarter. It is 24-21. Washington has the ball on Detroit's 6. And looks like they're in prime position to potentially get some more points now. There's one fan here saying, Jaden Daniels setting up totally unrealistic fan base expectations for every rookie quarterback for the rest of time, LOL. I mean, now I've only been watching football since I was, I think, 9, something like that. But I think that he's in a strong conversation right now for the best rookie quarterback season that I've seen. Definitely, I think he's going to be a thorn in the side of much of the NFC for years to come. Definitely think Philly's going to be among that. I mean, he just beat Philly a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to be not. I'm going to be looking forward to playing Washington the next few years, and also not looking forward to it at the same time. But again, I said coming out of the draft, I was seeing more that I would have hitched my franchise's wagon to out of Jayden Daniels than I was out of Caleb Williams. And people say, "Oh, Caleb Williams had to overcome the Chicago dysfunction, or all these different things." You're telling me that Washington was the pinnacle and the epitome of a well-oiled machine when Jayden Daniels got there? They had just brought in Dan Quinn, who, by all accounts, was a decent defensive coordinator, but we didn't know after Atlanta, how he would do as a head coach. There's a strong belief in recent years that there's an advantage to pairing an offensive background head coach to a young quarterback. That was not the case that they chose. This was a new ownership group. So on one hand, you had the advantage because you got the stench of Dan Snyder out of there rather. But on the other hand, aside from it being the bliss of the unknown as opposed to the devil that you knew, you didn't really know what else you were going to get with them. So there were a lot of things that came in that I'm not saying that he also had to overcome, but let's not act like there was a ton of exclamation points where Caleb Williams had question marks. Both of these guys were going into situations with some things that some reasons to be optimistic, but also some reasons to be asking questions. I'll put it that way. But to his credit, he's had a phenomenal season. Has Jayden Daniels? I'm happy for him that he went as high as he did. Obviously, as a Philly fan, did not want him to go to the Commanders, but I would have taken him last year. I would have taken him first overall. And I think there's a lot of teams now who, if they look back and say, did they have the first overall pick? Who would they have taken? I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of teams now would say Jayden Daniels, where they may have originally said Caleb Williams. And quite honestly, if you ever got Chicago to take some truth serum and give you an off-the-record answer, I wouldn't be surprised if they told you they would have done it over again. They would have taken Jayden Daniels as well. Mr. Osborne says 31-21. Now, I'm not surprised there. When I saw that it was first and goal on the 6, hardly too surprised by that. So, got about a minute and a half left before halftime. So, got about 31-ish minutes of regulation for Detroit to get some momentum of their own and then not give it back. But definitely right now, I don't know if Washington is looking just like they are sort of the beast has been awakened, or if Detroit is looking more like they're just choking. I don't really know how to read the situation to this point, but definitely not what I would have expected. Certainly not at halftime. For there to be a 31-21 lead in favor of Washington while playing in Detroit. That definitely surprises me. And then tomorrow we've got those two games at I believe it's 2 and 5:30 Central Time, I believe. Let me double check. 2 and 5:30, so 3 and 6:30 Eastern Time. The 2:00 game being Rams at Eagles, and the 5:30 game being Ravens at Bills. The Ravens-Bills game, obviously I can't wait to watch the Philly game, but just as a football fan, the Ravens-Bills game is going to be so fun to watch, I think. I know a lot of people are talking about how that could be the closest game of the whole postseason, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. I do think that for two guys who have, to my vantage point, kind of underperformed a little bit in the playoffs at times, but then you've got someone like Josh Allen, who I think is overcoming a lot of what plagued him and a lot of the mistakes that he was prone to making. And now we'll have to see if Lamar Jackson can go into Buffalo and sort of put behind him some of the narrative about him not being a good playoff quarterback. His last 3 games, he's done a lot better than he was earlier in his career, but that is still a narrative that I think he still has to shake. And I think that if he can't win tomorrow, or at least if he doesn't play well tomorrow, I don't think it necessarily he has to win to sort of fend off that narrative. But I think if he doesn't play well and they lose, I think that it's going to be hard for him to kind of escape the stench of that following him, just because first impressions last sometimes are hard to shake at any point. And I think that even though he's done better in his last couple of games, I think that people are still holding on to that. And I think that there's more risk for him, I think, if he loses that game, just in terms of and again, he already has he already got his second contract, so it's not like he's like playing for trying to play for his job or play for his contract. But I do think that questions about his ceiling are going to kind of become more and more. People feel like they have more and more of their answer if he doesn't win that game. Mr. Osborne says there's 1 minute left. I'm presuming that's still halftime in that game. So, excuse me. But I do want to jump in. I'm going to go back to baseball for a second because I did mention that the Hall of Fame announcements were going to come this coming week. For those who are going to be looking to watch the results, they're going to be coming in on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be on MLB Network. Coverage is going to be some of the usual suspects: Brian Kenny, John Morosi, Joel Sherman, and Jason Starr. So you can tune in to watch that. And excuse me. And then there's going to be on Friday evening, there's going to be a special with whoever the newly elected Hall of Famers are. That's going to be at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. But as I mentioned last week, for those who have, or even if you haven't heard of it, there's the Hall of Fame vote tracker that's kept in real time by, excuse me, by these guys, Ryan Thibodeau, Adam Dore, and Anthony Calamis. So they've been kind of keeping track right straight through. This was last updated just a couple of hours ago. Kind of about 44% of the ballots known. Ichiro still holding high with that 100% of the vote. CC Sabathia, 93%. Billy Wagner, 85%. And then Carlos Beltran, just over 80%. And then the only other one kind of hanging around up there a little bit is Andrew Jones with 72%. Everyone else is falling below 54%. So, and it's very rare for guys to have significant jumps once all the rest of the ballots that were not announced early become publicized. Typically, those numbers tend to go down after that, not up. So looking right now like we're going to have probably a 3 to 4 person Hall of Fame class, Ichiro, Sabathia, Wagner, and then maybe Beltran. He's kind of held just above that line for most of the time. So I'll be curious to see if the sort of silent Beltran vote is more pro or anti. But that's going to be a fascinating. He's probably the most fascinating one for me to watch this year, other than Andrew Jones, just because, again, what is how much is his role in the Houston thing at the very end of his career? How much is that going to stick to him with regard to this conversation? Because this is his 3rd time on the ballot. And I think a lot of people believe that had that not even happened, he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer, or at least a second ballot Hall of Famer. So I wonder if people are looking at it now as, okay, we've made him wait long enough. He's sort of did the crime and then did the time type of thing. Or if there's some people who just said, no, I'm not going to, if I didn't vote for him for certain reasons the last 2 years, I'm not going to suddenly flip on that because those reasons are still the same, which I think is entirely valid in its own right. So I am going to be watching to see how that number eventually lands, I'm gonna guess. It's gonna land probably somewhere in the low 70s. I don't think he's gonna get it. I think he's going to be somebody who gets close but just misses it. I have a hard time seeing him go from where he was last year, which if I can get that number up real quick, I have a hard time seeing him go from where he was last year to suddenly, being able to make that jump this year. Excuse me. But again, crazier things have happened. I found the numbers. 57.1%. So he would have to make almost a 20-point jump from last year, which again, currently he's at what would be a 23-point jump. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would be very surprised to see him make that jump this year, just based on the fact that his dynamic is so cut and dry. Like there's not like we don't know how much, where we don't know, if these reports about, for example, PEDs are really true, or he didn't really fail a test or one thing or another. It's not like some of these other things that are kind of more edge cases or more up for debate. We know what he was involved with. We know what he did, and we know that he was at the center of it. So I think that what the question becomes down to is just more, is that a disqualifier for you? I don't really see how that question changes, or the answer to that question changes from one year to the next for somebody. It could very well. I'm just struggling to see how it does. But that's my own opinion. Let me double check. No updates on the chat at this point. But yeah, and then I was talking to somebody the other day about Andrew Jones, who was the other guy who's sort of sniffing right below the surface there. And I know I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but I got to bring it up again just because I see him and Omar Vizquel in very similar lights. With regard to, they have the off-field, awful things that they were connected to, and then they were also individually regarded as all-time great defenders at their position, and at the same time, they're both in their 8th year of eligibility. So the fact that Omar Vizquel is sitting with 12% and Andrew Jones sits with 72%, I want to dig into that more, and I'm going to try and come back next week with something on that, because that's just astonishing to me. Now, I know that Jones was somewhat of a better hitter than was Vizquel, but he wasn't. I don't think he was that much better, where I can see how it's a 60-point difference. These guys are both. I don't really love using awards for this, but these guys are both, double-digit time Gold Glove winners. Vizquel was a 3-time All-Star. Jones was a 5-time All-Star. Jones has a Silver Slugger where Vizquel doesn't. And again, there's no disputing from me that in terms of home runs, particularly, Jones obviously significantly laps Vizquel. However, Vizquel actually has an identical on-base percentage to that of Jones. And what he lacks in home runs, he has more than double the stolen bases of Andrew Jones. So just because they were different styles of players, the fact that 60% is in the fact that you're more a home run hitter than a base stealer is just, I don't know, that's just wild to me. I'm not particularly wild about either one of them for, again, for obvious reasons that I've outlined in the past. But yeah, again, something I really want to try and get more of a feeling of. But if anybody has their own thoughts on it or takes on it or opinions on it, I'd love to hear what y'all think, because I'm struggling with this one in particular. Trevor jumps in and says, "Hey, Swifty Scoops, hope you're having a good night, bud." I am, Trevor. Hope the same for you. Can't complain. Phillies in the divisional round tomorrow. The Flyers just beat the Devils earlier today. Spring training is in, I think, 3 weeks it starts. Pitchers and catchers report for the Yankees on, I think it's the 11th. So doing well over here, I would say. Just need Zion Williamson to spend more time at the basketball court than the food court, and then I'd be chilling. Excuse me. Coming off of that, I did want. Oh, as long as we're talking a little bit earlier about the coaching stuff, I do want to get into a couple of the moves that happened just before we went live today. The Texas Longhorns agreed to an extension with Steve Sarkisian. He's not going to be a transition to the NFL, at least at this time. There is it was a 1-year extension, so his deal now goes through 2031. He could ultimately decide to go pro, but apparently, according to Action Network's Brett McMurphy, there were actually multiple teams that requested to interview him in the NFL this offseason, and he rejected both of them. Apparently, Dallas was not one of the two teams, according to multiple people that are cited in this report. So, and then the Atlanta Falcons had made an announcement just beforehand that they've got their new defensive coordinator. The Jets interim head coach, Jeff Ulbrich, is going to be the new defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons. The team announced this shortly after it was reported by Tom Pelissero. So, the Jets, to whatever degree he was considered a factor in the Jets head coaching search, evidently that is now no longer the case. Again, I don't know to what extent that was actually true, or that was actually something that was being seriously considered. They actually had a request for an interview declined a few days ago, which was Brian Grace. He had been requested and ultimately denied to request or denied the request after working for the 49ers following a stint at ESPN. But yeah, I go back to what I said earlier. We were talking about coaching searches. It's just, you've got different teams, and I'm looking at the list now. You've got different teams that have 15, 20 names of guys that they either have interviewed or wanted to interview. And then you've got the Cowboys standing out there like a sore thumb with 6 guys, and 2 of them aren't even actual candidates. One was just mentioned as a candidate, which was Aaron Glenn. There's been no significant traction there so far. Again, maybe that changes if the Lions lose today. And then Bill Belichick, who has obviously since taken a job with UNC, but there were reports that he could have been a candidate had he not already taken that job in college. And then the Deion Sanders thing, to this point, still doesn't sound like there's really any deal expected. I can't rule out anything with Jerry Jones, but I'm still going to go with my original belief that Kellen Moore is going to be the guy that they hire there, which is going to be unfortunate because that's going to be another freaking offseason coordinator turnover hire that the Eagles have to make. I'm trying to think, is this going to be like if that happens, is this going to be like the 5th year in a row that the Eagles change their offensive coordinator? I feel like every year, I feel like there's a new offensive coordinator for this team. But yeah, I am a little surprised that the head coaching searches for some of these other teams have taken more time. But I do know that with some of the rules that have been redirected and some of the rules that have been switched up and changed and however you want to say, I do know that some of that was relatively expected because, interviewing timelines are now so much different. And the restrictions on who you can interview within the playoffs, which, surprise, surprise, a lot of the guys that mostly get the majority of interviews are usually guys who are active in the playoffs and on those teams. So a lot of those guys, the limitations on how and when they can be either interviewed or hired, I think is making this slow down a little bit, which I think is ultimately potentially a good thing in some cases. But I also, I'm curious how some of these teams that don't appear to have really even a second round of interviews happening yet, or even a second round of who we plan to interview, put together yet. And maybe they have, and it's just not been publicized. But in contrast to a team like, the Patriots or, teams that we've seen in the last couple of years, it definitely does feel like these are going a little bit slower. And like some of these searches definitely feel like they're a little more all-encompassing, to put it mildly, than some of the ones that we're used to seeing. Mr. Osborne says Sanders is staying at CU. This has been way overhyped. I very much agree with you on that, Mr. Osborne. Excuse me. Yeah, again, it's not something I really understand. Well, let me rephrase that. I understand it, but I think that it's really, I think what it is I think it's playing up on a lot of, Jerry likes to be talked about. He likes the Cowboys to be talked about. He likes, Deion Sanders has never been one to shine away from the limelight. I mean, his nickname is Primetime. So typically that's not the nickname of somebody who sits at home reading library books. But yeah, definitely not something that I'd be betting too heavily on. But yeah, we'll have to see how it transpires, I guess. Because again, who can predict anything with that, man? And then I do want to talk about it a little bit, just because, again, I know that there's going to be some Devils fans listening to this. Obviously, I am a Flyers fan and have been for several years. The Flyers did take a victory on the road against the Devils today, 3-1. A couple of major plays by pardon me. A couple of major plays. We've got some big time shots on goal by Noah Cates. Forster, Brink, my guy Coots got an assist. My favorite player, Konechny, who has become somebody that I've really come to enjoy. Mitch Goff keeps up his really impressive rookie season. Samuel Ersson, who finally, after the ugly stuff that we had to sit through with at goaltender with the other two guys that we played earlier, Fedotov and the other guy whose name is escaping me right now. So seeing Ersson out there now looking like a more stabilizing force in goal for this team has been nice to see, and hope that continues. But love seeing a rivalry win for the Flyers over the Devils, especially on the road, any day of the week. And I haven't been talking a ton about the Pelicans recently, but I just got to love the fact that not only has this team, they had won several games in a row, and they just lost to the Celtics the other day by 1 point at the Garden. They got a couple of big games this week coming up against the Jazz and the Bucks. But man, the way that Misi has really come on and really become a strong force on the front line for this team, the way that he has really inserted himself as right up there with Sarr and some of the others as a contender for Rookie of the Year. He definitely became a spark and a sort of light of hope for the Pelicans when they desperately needed it, with a lot of other things that were going awry, with the absolute just roller coaster that continues to be the freaking Zion Williamson saga. Again, I'll reiterate it. I've said it before. I know that a lot of Pelicans fans don't agree with me. I hope to see him traded at the deadline. I don't see him providing the value that I don't see him ever reaching his ceiling at value on the court for the Pelicans for whatever reason. So I would just see what the best offer I could get was, and if I'm comfortable enough with it, I would make that deal. And then try and go get my boy Isaiah Stewart out of Detroit. Mr. Osborne says the Avs have been playing the win one, lose one. They have to get on a streak and catch up. Yeah, that sounds like what the Flyers were doing for a little bit there. But yeah, it's the excuse me. That's, I think, sometimes almost more frustrating than just a losing streak, is just like the sort of inability to build any sort of momentum and kind of no idea what the team actually is. It's I haven't been following the Avs too closely though, so I'm going to be withholding how much I say on that. But for your sake and for the sake of the other guys who I know are Avs fans here, I know that, or I hope that they get on a better track for y'all. And that being said, we are at the buzzer. It's just past 9 p.m. Central, 10 p.m. Eastern. Guys, thanks, y'all. I want to really appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight. Mr. Osborne, Trevor, always joining in, and we also, Mr. Burns, just had so many great people. We had a couple of newcomers who joined on tonight. I appreciate that as well. Looking forward to seeing how the games shake down. And if you're watching Coach Brislin, good luck to your Commanders the rest of the way tonight. I am obviously hoping that Detroit and Carson's Lions prevail, but we'll see. And then we'll see what happens tomorrow. With these two games should be a couple of great ones between the Ravens and the Bills. And, of course, my Eagles against the LA Rams. And with all of that, and of course, like I said earlier, don't forget about Tuesday, 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern, the MLB Hall of Fame announcement only on MLB Network. And we'll be here to break it all down once again. Same scoop time, same scoop channel next week. Scoop out.